Thinking back to those early COVID days when we were all like a little too afraid to make eye contact in the grocery store, I swear I got really good at navigating those aisles without looking at anyone.
Oh, yeah, I totally get it. It was definitely a weird time.
It was. But all that awkwardness kind of got me thinking about this question we got from a listener. Can you actually catch COVID just from, looking at someone?
It's a question I think we've all had at some point, especially with everything we've learned about how viruses spread these last few years.
Totally. We all know the basics by now, coughing, sneezing, all those respiratory droplets flying around. But what about the eyes? It's not like those droplets are specifically aiming for our noses.
That's right, they're definitely not. So to really dig into this question, let's quickly recap how COVID-19 actually spreads.
Okay, sounds good.
So we've got these respiratory droplets, right? And they're like these tiny little virus carriers that get released when an infected person breathes or talks or coughs or sneezes. And then those droplets can be inhaled by other people, or they can land directly on someone's, nose or mouth.
Right, got it. So where do our eyes fit into all of this? Is it actually possible to contract the virus through our eyes?
That is the million-dollar question. And this is where the science gets really interesting. Researchers are currently looking into two main theories, or hypotheses, I guess,
Mm.
about eye transmission: direct inoculation and viral migration.
Okay, let's break those down. Direct inoculation sounds kind of intense.
It does sound pretty
Yeah.
intense, but it's actually a pretty straightforward idea. So the conjunctiva, which is that thin membrane that covers the white part of your eye and also lines your eyelids,
Oh,
that conjunctiva could potentially be an entry point for the virus.
interesting.
Yeah, so direct inoculation basically means that a droplet carrying the virus lands directly on that conjunctiva and infects it, kind of similar to how viruses can get in through other mucous membranes in our body, like in the nose.
So it's like if someone sneezed right in your eye.
Exactly.
I've always been told not to touch my eyes, and now I'm like, okay, I really get it. But what about viral migration? That one sounds a lot more complicated.
It is a little more complex, but also really fascinating. So viral migration has to do with this thing called the tear drainage system, which is also known as the nasolacrimal system.
The naso what now? You lost me there.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. But basically, think of it this way. When your eyes make tears, they don't just constantly run down your face, right? We have this drainage system, almost like little pipes, that carries those tears away from our eyes.
Okay.
So tears go from the eyes into the tear duct, which is that little opening in the inner corner of your eye. And then from there, the tears drain down into the nasal cavity, which is why sometimes when you cry, your nose runs.
Oh, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I always wondered about that. So if I'm hearing you right, are you saying the virus could, like, use this whole tier system as a way to travel from my eyes to other parts of my body, like some kind of secret passageway?
Yeah, it sounds kind of freaky, right? But don't freak out just yet. Even though it's possible, it doesn't necessarily mean that's happening all the time or that it's a huge risk. We've learned a lot about how COVID spreads in the last few years, and this whole eye thing still being researched.
Okay, that's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in all the what ifs. So what does the research say so far about how much of a risk this actually is?
Well, some early studies took a look at tears from COVID patients,
Okay.
and they found surprisingly low levels of the virus, even in people who are actively infected.
So not zero, but also not exactly, like a party in there.
Exactly. And that was actually really interesting to the researchers. Like maybe the eye could be a way in for the virus, but it might not be as good at, replicating and shedding the virus as, say, your respiratory system.
Okay, that does make me feel a little better, but it does make me think about all those times I've gotten, you know, pink eye. Conjunctivitis, I think it's officially called.
Right, conjunctivitis.
The worst. I'm suddenly wondering if those times were actually COVID. Should I be worried?
That's a great question. And I'm sure a lot of people listening are wondering the same thing. But honestly, if you've had pink eye, it was almost definitely not COVID. Conjunctivitis is super common, and it can be caused by all kinds of things: viruses, bacteria, even allergies.
Okay, so no need to spiral every time my eyes are a little itchy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, while COVID can cause conjunctivitis in some cases, it's not one of the most common symptoms at all.
That makes sense. So where does all this leave us with practical advice? Like we've talked about the science, which is super interesting, but what are we actually supposed to do with this information? Should we all be wearing safety goggles everywhere we go now?
Right. That's the big question, isn't it? Knowing something is only useful if you know what to do with it. But the good news is a lot of the advice we're all used to by now still applies here. and it can help lower the risk, even if it's small.
Okay, so what kind of specific precautions are we talking about?
Well, first and foremost, and this one's always been key, don't touch your face, especially your eyes, without washing your hands really well.
Hands off the face, got it. What else?
You know, if you're a contact lens wearer, you might want to think about switching to glasses, at least sometimes,
Mm.
especially in situations where you're concerned about being exposed.
Okay.
It's not that contacts are, like, dangerous or anything, but remember how we were talking about direct inoculation? Glasses can actually act as a bit of a barrier. Plus, let's be
Uh-huh.
real, a lot of us touch our eyes more when we're putting in or taking out contacts.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely catch myself rubbing my eyes after I've messed with my contacts. So, glasses, good hand hygiene, anything else?
And of course, the good old-fashioned stuff still works. Wearing a mask, especially if you're in a crowded indoor space, can help stop those respiratory droplets from, even getting near your eyes in the first place.
Right, makes sense.
And then, keeping some distance from other people, particularly if someone looks sick, always a good idea.
It's kind of wild how those, like, really basic things can actually make such a big difference.
I know, right? And, it's easy to get caught up in the whole COVID specific side of this. But honestly, I think looking at this whole eye thing actually tells us a lot about how viruses in general can be sneaky, about how they use all these different ways to get into our bodies.
That's so true. I started this deep dive wondering if I could get COVID from looking at someone, and now I'm like, wait, how does our tear drainage system even work? It really makes you realize how complex our bodies are.
It really does. And it also makes you think, like, could this knowledge about eye transmission change how we think about stopping other viruses in the future, too?
Yeah.
Could this lead to new hygiene stuff or even like totally new types of protective gear? It's fascinating to consider.
That's a really good point. It's like every new thing we learn just opens up a whole bunch of new questions. I know I'm going to be thinking about all this next time someone gives me like a suspicious side eye.
Right.
But for our listeners, for anyone who's maybe feeling a little, I don't know, overwhelmed by all this info, I think the biggest thing to take away is this. Even though catching COVID through your eyes is probably pretty rare, it's still smart to be careful, you know? Don't touch
Yeah.
your face. Maybe think about wearing those glasses a bit more and keep up with all those good hygiene habits we've all gotten used to.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The more we know about how viruses do their thing, the better we can protect ourselves and everyone around us.
Exactly. Well, that was a fascinating deep dive into the world of viruses and our amazing, kind of gross, but mostly amazing eyes.
I know, right?
We'll be back next time, same place, for another deep dive. Until then, stay curious, everyone.